Just ahead on American Black Journal, I'm going to talk with the author of a book that chronicles the history of African Americans right here in Detroit. Plus, a local theater company premieres an original production about the 1967 Detroit Uprising. Don't go anywhere. American Black Journal starts now.
American Black Journal is funded by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a partner with communities where children come first.
How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television. Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. Award-winning author and journalist Herb Boyd's latest book is a rich source of information on African Americans in Detroit. The book is titled Black Detroit, A People's History of Self-Determination. It tells the stories of the city's black population from the 1800s to the present day, and it documents their courage and determination in the wake of discrimination and repression. Boyd is going to sign copies of his book at the Charles H. Wright African American Museum on June 10th. Plus, he will take part in a conversation about the 1967 Detroit Rebellion. I'm pleased to have Herb Boyd as my guest today on American Black Journal.
Always
Welcome to the show.
Always a pleasure.
It is amazing to me that I've been doing this show as long as I have, and I don't think I've had you as a guest. There's something wrong there, right?
Right.
We have to fix that.
We kind of miss each other in Ann Arbor.
No, that's right. A couple weeks ago.
You did a splendid job on the panel there.
I tried.
No surprises there.
I tried. This book, I love the idea of this book, partially because I think when we talk about Black Detroit today,
yes,
people think of it in very modern terms. And if they think about history at all, they think of the Great Migration, which of course brought black people to the city in far greater numbers than before.
Sure.
But nobody looks back to the 1800s. I mean, you know, black people have been a part of the city for a much longer time than that.
Much longer.
You do a really, I think, you know, great excavation of all of that, the rich history going back much further.
Because in your introduction, you say the 1800s. Well, we can say 18th century.
Yeah, 18th century, right.
1700s,
right.
Because it goes back to Cadillac.
Yes.
You know, a lot of people don't know that he was called the Black Prince.
Yeah, right.
And I've been trying to dig into that, you know, what level of melanin are we talking about here for Mr. Cadillac? And a lot of people don't know that the car was named after him.
Yes.
You know?
Right.
So it's a lot of...
So there's a person, right?
I uncover a lot of things that the general reading population are not aware of.
Yeah.
At the same time, those who think they're truly informed about the city
right.
will be surprised by a number of things I uncover. It was an idea that was brought to me, Stephen. It did not germinate here.
Right.
You know, as many of my books brought to me by people who think I can do it.
Yeah.
I say, you think I can do this?
You really think I can do that?
In a way, it's been kind of germinating and percolating for a number of years inside of me. And certainly I've thought about it sometimes, and you push it aside. But finally, 3 women in particular, you know, talk to me. Of course, my wife is my companion, and she works hard as I do on these projects. And my agent is just absolutely peerless in what she does, and that's Marie Brown. And of course, the editor, Tracy Sherrard. Tracy's out of Flint, but she's moved right on up in the ranks of the industry, and she's just a remarkable editor. So with that kind of team, you know, how you going to fail?
Right?
I can't fail with that, you know. And then it's growing. The team is is growing too, because a number of others have volunteered their time because they believe so fervently and passionately in the project. And that's probably one of the most encouraging things, when you can get some of these top professionals who can command top dollars, and they're willing to kind of, look here, I'm going to help you out on this.
Because it's an important story.
I think so, Stephen.
Yeah. Let's talk about this title, A People's History of Self-Determination. What do you mean by that?
Well, one of the things about this is that there's so many obstacles thrown, as we know so well, in terms of no matter what city you're in.
Sure.
And Detroit takes on a particular kind of resonance because of its location, historical developments there, the automobile industry, to say nothing of the migration periods that brought thousands, if not millions, people from Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. My family, my mother brought up my brother and I from out of Alabama.
Okay, wow.
Right.
Wow.
So it's kind of like a straight line migration, if you look at the map, and I've certainly asked your viewers to do that. Check the map out, see where you are on this. But anyway, what happens is that given all those obstacles, we've overcome them again and again and again. And we start with slavery. A lot of my students, I taught for 15 years at Wayne State University, and in those early days, in talking to the young people who were coming in from out of the Detroit public school system, of course, to cast no aspersion on them, but they were just not prepared at all to talk about African-American culture and history. That's what we developed at Wayne State University at that time, and of course, the '67 rebellion is connected to that. So you talk about this here, determination, no matter what obstacles is placed in front of us, if it's slavery going all the way back then. And what I do in the book is almost episodically, I hit those events where we have to recover.
Right.
Because after the Blackburn affair in 1833, that was the city's first major upsurge in terms of upheaval. So right from the start, we couldn't get comfortable, off the Underground Railroad.
Well, I mean, some people don't know, for instance, that slavery took place here in Detroit. I mean, I talk to people all the time who think of it as a Southern institution, which it was in many ways, but there were iterations of it all over the North, and including here in Detroit.
New York City, for example. They had more slaves in New York City than in the Carolinas at one time. So Detroit is very... over the ages, as you jump from one decade to another, you can see kind of the intensity, the role and the passion, the spirit of black people and the enterprise that they had, no matter what they were doing. If they were working in the foundries, some of the other, the dangerous jobs in the plants, whether they were, out there paving the highways or cutting down the trees and building up this city, the whole infrastructure, black workers were there. So when the union came along in this town after the automobile industry, well, who could best do that kind of work? We've been doing it all along, so it was no big deal. But we came into those plants in such numbers, and doing those kind of jobs that very few people, I need the lowest paid jobs, the most hazardous, the dangerous jobs. I mean, I worked at Dodge Main myself.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So just long enough to get out of there.
Right. That was not easy
be here
work.
Much longer.
That was not easy work.
Tough work.
And people don't remember that the jobs that we were most allowed to do for the longest period of time were the worst jobs.
And the worst jobs, the lowest paid jobs. And that's where we were. And that's where I was to a great degree, although as a swing man, when someone didn't show up from work, I did their job. Consequently, I moved all over the plant.
Saw the whole plant,
It was similar to my living pattern in Detroit. I lived all over the city. We bounced here, bounced there, and I brought, each time I moved into a neighborhood, Stephen, I brought all those people with me when I went to the next neighborhood. I never left them behind.
That's really cool.
I took those memories right with me. Everything I learned here, if it was like a gyroscope, I learned how to play chess, when I moved out on 8 Mile Road and had to go back down into the heart of the city again, I picked up a lot of skills and some understanding on how to get my own life together. And I think the movement, and of course I owe that all to my mother, and she runs like a narrative thread through the book. A close reader will detect who she is. No spoiler here.
Let me ask you about, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary this year of the '67 rebellion. In some ways, as you point out, that tracks with the history of African Americans in this city over centuries, this idea of resistance. What does that look like today?
You know, a lot of people, I think you said rebellion too, and therein lies a certain amount of controversy.
Yeah, some people don't like that.
Yeah, they think it's right. But it's a very sharp distinction there.
Right, it is.
In terms of the activity of the people. Because when I arrived in Detroit, a couple of months before the outbreak of the 43 riot. Right. You put race in front of that word. It was a race riot.
Yeah.
And in the book, we have at least one example of that, a very bloody example of what happened with this intensity between the blacks and the whites.
And whites in the plants, right, yeah.
So anyway, when you get to the rebellion, it was less of that. And a kind of a consumer revolt. You know, people were throwing bricks through the windows and running off with merchandise. It was property being assailed, as opposed other than the law enforcement agency, the National Guard, the 101st and 82nd, coming in and doing their as well as the National Guard. Right. There was a danger there for many of those people who were in the street, as they would say, breaking the law. Yeah. So one of the things about that, even before the rebellion of '67, we cannot ignore the fact that, as in most of those kind of cataclysmic aspects, they're always like an accumulative process. There's some stages that led up to it. But here you have Mayor Kavanaugh at that time. If he'd have listened to Conrad Mallett Sr., he would have headed off a lot of that. But they had this kind of feeling that, oh, everything, we're not going to be Watts. We're not going to be Newark. We're not going to be Harlem. You know, we got a model city going here. And this understanding for Kavanaugh coming out of the whole Kennedy, you know, and then later the Johnson administration, and what it meant in terms of the Great Society. They felt that we have everything together here. We don't have to worry. But if they, on the east side, Kirchhoff, 1966. That was a perturbation of it right there. You saw some indication that things were not as rosy as you thought. You dig it? So if they'd have paid attention to some of those signs, as John Dancy did early on, when the migrants were coming into town, he was very aware of social welfare needs that these people had. So we've had some fairly, what you call, visionaries, you know, in our government, but sometimes they're not heeded.
Sometimes they don't see it. All right, Herb Boyd, we could talk for hours.
Oh,
you and I.
We got to do it again.
Yeah, we would have to do it again on June 10th at
June 10th at the Wright Museum. Back home again.
We'll have you back on again, too.
Good to be here, baby.
All right, good to see you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Coming up next, a stage production filled with never-before-heard stories about the 1967 civil disturbance. But first, here's a 1986 Detroit Black Journal interview with then-Republican candidate for governor, William Lucas.
The Republican Party, its policies, Ronald Reagan. Not what a majority of black people will necessarily identify with. As a matter of fact, while you were in Cobo Hall with the president, as you know, there were close to 1,000 people out front of Cobo Hall that day, led by John Conyers, protesting the Republican policies and your affiliation with the Republican Party. What did you think about that?
Well, I thought that there were 8,000 people inside of Cobo Hall with Bill Lucas and the President of the United States, and maybe 500 or 600 outside with Mr. Conyers, doing exactly what this system of ours allowed them to do, protest peacefully, no problem.
The majority, though, of those 1,000 outside were black. Are you afraid that, and you yourself have said you don't agree with Ronald Reagan 100%. You don't agree with his policy on South Africa. There are other things that you differ. Are you afraid that most blacks won't be able to see you as an individual and won't be able to move that aside?
No, I'm not. I thought that I've been in this community for well over 2 decades. I've served the people of this community as an independent, as a man. I left the Democratic Party to continue that independence. And I don't think most people who know anything about me or have heard about me or who have voted for me believes that I'm going to have to follow anybody's policy. I've said so repeatedly, and I mean it.
So we commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Detroit Rebellion. There's a new stage production that's giving voice to different perspectives and experiences during the uprising. The Matrix Theater Company's original production of Dream Deferred, Detroit 1967, is based on exclusive audio-taped interviews that were conducted after the civil disturbance. A cross-section of people were interviewed in an effort to learn from this tragic chapter in the city's history. These first-person accounts are dramatized in the production. Here to tell us more is artistic director Megan Buckley-Ball, along with the show's director, David Wolber, and actor Mike Sandusky. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
This is a great iteration of all of the great things that we're doing this year to try to look back 50 years. Tell me about this idea to sort of give voice to the people from that time through sort of modern voices.
Sure. Well, about a year ago, Dr. Nicholas reached out to us at Matrix Theater and said, you know, I have these tapes, I have these audio interviews that I did following the uprising of '67, and I would really like to see them dramatized. I've been sitting on them for a long time, and is that something that you would be interested in doing? And we, of course, fell over ourselves trying to say yes faster. And so kind of one by one, he typed them up and sent them our way, and we started to form a script out of it, and it's been such a fantastic learning experience, but also it's the mere breadth of coverage that he was able to get just based on the interviews alone is amazing.
Yeah. At the Free Press, we have been collecting stories that people had during that time through films that they took. A lot of them, the sort of Super 8 films that people were taking in the city at that time. And one of the things that I feel like we learned from that is a lot about what the city was like then, outside the context of the rebellion itself, that it was just a different place. There were a lot more people here, lots of places that are now sort of asleep, I guess, in the city were very much alive. I would imagine that you're seeing at least some of that in the same thing in these audio tapes.
Yeah, one of the things about the audio that we have is that it is all from the perspective of immediately after the rebellion, the riot, the uprising, or whatever their perspective is, mostly through like 75, 74. So it's a very different time. It's not, it doesn't have a modern perspective on it. Because I saw it 12th and Claremont at the Redford Theater when they screened it. And I loved the footage, and it was interesting to see or hear the audio, which was interviews that are current. Looking back at
asking
it,
people to think back on the films that they're looking at.
And so the perspective that we have here is a little closer to the time. There is a little bit of perspective on what happened, but it is very close to the time, and we've had to remind ourselves, I've been talking to the actors about putting themselves in the space of the Vietnam War going on. You know, after some of the interviews are taking place in the Nixon administration. So it's so it's a very different time and headspace to get into. And it gives an interesting perspective on it. There's 42 interviews in the piece, so 42 different characters, and they all have
a lot.
It's a lot of different perspectives, little points of view. And we have about 45 seats in the theater, so I'm expecting that we'll have 85 to 90 different perspectives in the room on what happened and how people are relating to it.
So you're one of the 42, right?
Yes, I am. Many of the 42.
Right? Are you many of the 42?
Yes.
Talk about what that's like to try to get into that space that he's talking about, where it's 1967, different time in Detroit.
Absolutely, it's very challenging because these people come from the same area and they're experiencing, an event together, but all of them go through different changes. And it's very hard to get in that space because, this person may have a house just like you have a house, but, I'm going through something totally different. So like, the challenging part was, how do I act this out? You know what I'm saying? Like, my roses died, but mine are still alive. So how do I, convey that to an audience? And so that would be that's the most challenging part to me. But I'm having a lot of fun learning about an event that I've only heard a few things about. Growing up, I think I heard my grandma mention the riots maybe once. And that was it, because nobody else wanted to talk about it. So it's just fun learning all these different facts about all these different people and who helped and what they're going through and everything.
What are some of the things we learn from what we hear on these tapes? If you could, compress that 2 or 3 minute answer.
One of the biggest things that we learn, I think, is that the thing that we hear kind of over and over again is that there's no way that the list of the dead is limited to 43. As was put out quite often. We hear doctors, right? we hear nurses, we hear people who owned stores who were just kind of recognizing what was going on and observing what was happening, and every time they say
that's more.
Absolutely. It's interesting because during the process we actually have been able to match up some of the stories with some of the names of the dead that were listed, first in John Lowell's piece immediately following the uprising, and then again in Our magazine just a couple of weeks ago. So that's been very interesting, and just trying to find those connections and things like that. But also I think that one of the most important things that we've been able to learn from the pieces themselves is kind of how similar things are now to how they were right before.
Wow.
And so that's
sort of frightening, right?
It's terrifying, yeah, it absolutely is. But I think that, that's one of the most important things that we're trying to get out with this show is not necessarily this is how you should think about it, but instead maybe it's time to start thinking about
sort of look around,
observe what's happening now, and what are the steps that need to be taken to avoid repeating history.
See which parts of this maybe are familiar because you can see them.
Truly.
You can see them presently.
Right.
One of the things that the movie 12th and Claremont that I drew out of it after watching it myself was this tremendous sense of sadness that settled over the city after this, and that was one of the universal things. Black people, white people, everyone was sort of moved in a really depressing way because of that. I would imagine that's also pretty evident in the scripts.
I think so. I mean, again, most of the interviews take place in that 5-year period afterwards, and so they're reflecting on and seeing what the loss is. They're coming to terms with what the loss is, and the people leaving the city, because they're already seeing it. There was already some flight before, and it just exponentially worse after that. And so I think that the loss of the city and the neighborhoods and the feeling that which I think is represented in 12th and Claremont pretty well, of what existed before. You see a lot of the loss in people trying to understand what happened. And what I think is interesting is that I'm not sure that we're closer to a lot of answers of what do we do to prevent this kind of thing again, because it's, we've got some 5 basic factors of inequality in unemployment, inequality in education, inequality in housing. You've got police brutality, and those things, they're different now than they were then, but they're still there, and it's still affecting in a big way.
The anger is the other thing that I would imagine that you sort of pick up from these tapes. Talk about trying to sort of channel that anger in a way that that's authentic, but then also sort of appropriate.
Well, the good thing about it is a lot of these interviews, these people aren't angry.
They aren't.
These people, some of these people do speak with a tone of anger. But I have some people who speak with the tone of, well, I learned from this, or there are people who are glad that this happened. So that's the beauty in all of it. Everybody's not angry at this event. Everybody learned something different from it.
What about the people you say who were glad about it? Give me an idea of what that felt like.
That was pretty weird, These are people, who felt like they've been treated unfair, and they were fed up, and until this time, they didn't know what else to do. So when this kicked off, they was like, well, this is the answer, so I'm going to jump in, and this is going to get things done.
Do you anticipate at the theater being able to talk with the people who see it about what their reaction is?
Very much, That's one of the things that we enjoy doing most at Matrix. We like to say that when curtain call is done and you're exiting the theater, we don't like for that to be the end of your experience. We like for that to be the beginning. And so we urge people to stick around and talk to each other about their experience. We have a couple of post-show engagement sessions, both with the creators, David, myself, Dr. Nicholas, and Dr. Harvey Reed. As well as one with the cast, just to be able to talk about our experiences and maybe answer any questions about maybe pieces that have been edited out. Dr. Nicholas gave us over 3 hours of coverage, so we've had to, trim it down and make that work. But we love for our audiences to stick around and to call us afterwards or email their thoughts in and be able to share that with others. Well,
and that's the important part of it, is this sort of the lasting learning that comes out of all of these things. All right. Well, glad to have you guys here, and congrats on the play.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. All right, that's our program for today. Thanks for watching. You can get more information about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org, and as always, you can connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.